$2.3 million to inject 6-month-old beagle puppies with cocaine. Apparently, there's not enough evidence of what happens to humans on cocaine. $3 million to watch hamsters fight on steroids. This is the tip of the iceberg.
Ranking Member Paul, you're recognized for your opening comments.
Thank you. This committee is long overdue for a hearing that focuses on the rampant waste, fraud, and abuse in the federal government. We're faced with a $31 trillion mountain of debt. Rather than attempt to get spending under control, though, both parties continue to propose new spending with no regard for the exploding debt or controlling the already existing spending. To make matters worse, everyone in Congress knows that the plague of waste has infected just about every federal agency. But rather than take steps to restore fiscal health, Congress buries its head in the sand, doles out more and more taxpayer money every year to the executive branch with no strings attached, crosses its fingers, and hopes the problem will fix itself. For years, I've documented outlandish spending in my annual waste report, which exposes how the federal government is misusing Americans' hard-earned tax dollars. My most recent report uncovered $482 billion in government waste. For example, NIH spent more than $1.1 million to get mice drunk. Apparently, we're not aware of what happens when you drink too much. $2.3 million to inject 6-month-old beagle puppies with cocaine. Apparently, there's not enough evidence of what happens to humans on cocaine. $3 million to watch hamsters fight on steroids. This is the tip of the iceberg. This is the kind of stuff. This has been going on since the 1970s. Many of you will remember, the studies to figure out what makes people happy. This stuff's been going on forever. And yet the agency that funds a lot of this, the National Science Foundation, we've doubled their budget in the last 2 years. And we think, oh, well, they'll be much better with waste and fraud with double the amount of money. It's my opinion that the only way you ever rein in waste and fraud is give these agencies less money, and then they'll be forced to make do on less money. Government watchdogs like the GAO were created to expose and combat waste, fraud, and abuse and mismanagement in the federal government. Every 2 years, GAO publishes its own report that helps call out government misdeeds. The high-risk report is a compilation of government failures and vulnerabilities. It spotlights agencies and programs prone to waste, fraud, and abuse. One issue prominently featured in GAO's most recent high-risk report is the government-wide problem with improper payments. This has been listed in the past and is listed again this year. For example, in 2022, GAO found that Medicare made $46 billion in improper payments. Medicaid made $81 billion in improper payments, which should really not come as a surprise, given that the Medicaid program suspended enforcement of eligibility reviews during the COVID pandemic. This hasn't been talked about much, but during the pandemic, all the so-called rules for looking at abuse just went out the window, and they said, oh, well, everybody deserves Medicaid, everybody deserves food stamps, and nobody came off any of these programs. We just threw out all of the oversight of these programs. And as a consequence, they're in some of the worst state that they've been in a long time. And if this wasn't bad enough, GAO looks at, the substantial levels of fraud in the Department of Labor's unemployment insurance program and says it's almost impossible to grapple with the problem because it's so big and so opaque. Like my own waste report, GAO also identified Department of Defense as a consistent perpetrator of waste, fraud, and abuse. Since 1995, GAO has identified Department of Defense's financial management as high risk. Unfortunately, not much has changed since then, other than the DoD receiving bigger and bigger checks every year. This is an example of how this is really a bipartisan problem. Republicans wanting unlimited checks for the Defense Department, Democrats wanting unlimited checks for the social welfare. Everything goes up and the oversight becomes less and less efficient or profound. Until the Department of Defense can properly account for the money it spends, though, Congress can never effectively conduct oversight of the department. The DoD has become a behemoth of spending, and no one here ever questions it. How does all this waste happen? A better question might be, how does all this waste continue to happen and get worse all the time? When I was a kid in the 1970s, William Proxmire, a conservative Democrat, used to give his Golden Fleece Awards for nonsensical government spending. But here we are decades later, still facing the same problems. There was one study that they did in the last 2 years, I think it was over $1 million, to study if you take selfies of yourself smiling and you look at these selfies later on in the day, whether or not you'll be happier. Well, the thing is You think that's going to get better if we give the National Science Foundation more money? So we doubled their budget, and they do more of this craziness. And every year we point it out, and every year it gets worse because no one is willing to call them on it and say, we're going to give you less money next year unless you're better with spending the money. Mr. Chairman, GAO identified numerous instances of waste, fraud, and abuse that Congress can easily address. I appreciate GAO's work, but what really is needed is congressional will to significantly reduce government waste and spending. The American people deserve an accountable government that manages their hard-earned dollars responsibly. Mr. Todaro, thank you for being here today. I look forward to hearing your testimony and working with you to reduce the waste, fraud, and abuse identified in your report.